as Iranians continue to protest their government across the country. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle announcing support for anti-government protesters in Iran. This comes as Iranian officials organized a series of pro-government rallies today in at least 10 cities across that country. Today's events were a response to the previous days of often violent demonstrations that have claimed the lives of at least 21 people. Joining me now is Sohrab Ahmari, senior writer at Commentary Magazine. You've been covering this from the beginning. I encourage everyone to follow him on Twitter as well, because you have really good updates, and I want to get to one in particular. But tell me, are the protests growing as well as continuing, the ones that are against the government?
Well, the size is not as big as it was in 2009 when you had 3 million people in the capital at one point. But you're seeing lots of scattered protests, and it's much more nationwide, even in really small towns and hamlets, if you will. So they're continuing, but they're just not being able to amass, and that's partly because the security response, as usual with this regime, is so brutal. And
tell me about that, because there's concern about the fate of the protesters and how they're targeted. That's what I wanted to ask you about. You were alerting Twitter support today.
Targeted sanctions, an announcement that, if you are identified as a major human rights violator in these events, the United States will block your access to international markets and impose sanctions on your travel.
Will Europe go along with that? Because, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, our ambassador to the UN, she said that she's calling for an emergency meeting, the Security Council. But if Europe has already figured into their plans ways to do business with Iran, are they going to join us in fighting back against a regime that has terrible human rights violations?
That's one of the problems with this nuclear deal, is it bakes desanctioning the regime into the process of the deal. So the Europeans will say, won't this be a violation of the nuclear deal? But the nuclear deal is narrowly focused on the nuclear issues. The U.S., I think, can lawfully confront the regime on other things, whether it's their malicious behavior in the region, their attempts to undermine other governments, and their own domestic human rights violations. Moreover, the U.S. just has tremendous power, as you know, to shut any entity out of the financial markets, regardless of what anyone else thinks about it.
And then last quick question, what do you think President Trump will do at his next deadline of January 11th in regards to the deal?
I would hope that he does not certify the deal, because the Iranian regime has not has not lived up to its obligations, not least with missile testing across the region. Continue to, although this was not in the deal, but it's continued to try to undermine the sovereignty of nearby regional powers. So this is not a regime that's playing ball, as the Obama administration promised it would. So I don't think the nuclear deal should be certified.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sohrab. We appreciate it, and we hope to have you back.